My husband planned the perfect accident to get rid of me for insurance money, but he didn't know I had already changed the beneficiary. When the truth came out, he was the one begging for mercy. It's strange, really, how something so unexpected can feel like a sinking ship, the kind that takes everything down with it. That night when he told me he had something special planned, I had no idea just how deeply I'd fall into the cold, dark water. Our marriage had been crumbling for months. At first, I thought it was just the routine of life settling in, the small disagreements, the silence at dinner, the empty spaces in between our words. But then the distance between us grew like a chasm, a canyon wide enough that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge it. I've always had a career I could be proud of. I've worked hard to build a name for myself, a job I love, with a salary that allows me to enjoy the finer things in life. I don't say that to brag, but because it's part of the story, the reason why our relationship started to feel like a tug of war. He hated how successful I had become, not because he didn't want me to succeed, but because he felt like he was fading into the background, overshadowed by my accomplishments. At first, he tried to hide it, the resentment, the bitter comments here and there, the way he'd roll his eyes when I mentioned work. Eventually, it came out in passive-aggressive remarks that stung like paper cuts. Little things like, must be nice to have everything handed to you, or, some people are just lucky. Those comments piled up, and with every passing day we grew colder toward each other. But that night, everything changed. He walked in after a long day at work, his suit slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. I had been sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone, not really doing anything in particular. He surprised me by saying, "I've made a reservation for dinner. It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it." I looked at him, confused. "A dinner surprise? Since when do you do surprises?" I asked, skeptical. He never really did. His smile was warm, almost too warm, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just trust me." There was something about the way he said it, too casual, too perfect, that made my stomach churn. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, who doesn't like a surprise dinner? Maybe he was trying to make an effort. So I got dressed, though a little uneasy, but willing to let the past go for the night. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was immediately struck by the lavish decor, the kind of place where the waiters are impeccably dressed, and the lighting is just low enough to make everything feel intimate and mysterious. There were candles on the tables, and the air smelled of expensive perfumes and rich, savory dishes. It felt out of place for us, like we were two strangers who had accidentally stumbled into a world that wasn't ours. I tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling creeping up my spine as he led me to the table. He pulled out my chair, his smile still plastered on his face, and for a brief moment, it seemed like everything was okay. Like maybe we could work this out. He ordered the wine, and for once we sat in silence, just enjoying the atmosphere, but it wasn't relaxing. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating. Then came the toast. He lifted his glass with a smile that didn't seem to match the tension in his eyes. "To us," he said, his voice strangely steady. I clinked my glass against his, trying to force a smile. "To us," I echoed as I took a sip. I noticed something. The wine tasted too smooth, too sweet. I'm no expert, but something about the way it slid down my throat didn't feel right. My mind brushed it off, thinking it was just a rare bottle, some fancy vintage I didn't know about. But then, the sensations started. A warmth that spread through my chest and down to my stomach, too quick and too overwhelming. I set the glass down, trying to keep my composure, but the warmth kept spreading, turning into a burning sensation that made my head swim. My breathing quickened and I blinked several times, trying to clear the fog descending on my mind. I reached for my napkin to dab my forehead, but my hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but from something else. His eyes never left me. "Are you okay?" His voice sounded normal, casual, but there was something about the way his lips curled at the corners. Satisfaction, relief. I tried to smile, to shake off the unease that was now starting to claw at my insides. I think I'm just tired, I lied, my voice shaky. But it wasn't just tiredness. My body was betraying me, and I could feel myself losing control of it. My vision began to blur, and the room, once so elegant and pristine, started to spin. I reached for the edge of the table to steady myself, but it slipped out from under my fingers. My breath caught in my throat, and panic began to rise in my chest. How could I be so foolish? Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. As I tried to steady myself, the room tilted completely. My head felt too heavy to lift, and my arms hung limp at my sides. I tried to call out to him, but no sound came from my lips. My chest tightened, as though something cold was pressing against my lungs, stealing my breath. I felt like I was sinking, falling into a void with no escape. His face was still in my line of sight, his eyes wide with concern. That was the mask he wore. The truth was there in the corners of his eyes. A gleam, a flicker of something more sinister. I couldn't fight it anymore. The world spun in slow motion as my body failed me. I had no strength left to hold myself up. My vision blurred until everything was a haze of light and dark, and just before everything went black, the last thing I saw was his face. His eyes locked on mine with a satisfied, almost gloating expression. He didn't care that I was falling. He was watching, waiting, and that was when I knew. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, a calculated move. He had poisoned me. He had planned this, and I had no idea what was coming next. I collapsed, feeling myself slip away from consciousness. The last thought I had before I lost everything was a sharp, chilling realization. I had been set up. I woke up in a haze, the cold, sterile smell of the hospital room wrapping around me like an unwelcome blanket. The beeping of machines surrounded me, rhythmic and mechanical, like a reminder that I was still alive, still breathing, still here. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as though someone had replaced my bones with stones. My head throbbed, the dull ache a constant companion. My mouth was dry, sticky with the taste of something metallic. My vision blurred as I opened my eyes. The bright hospital lights above me were too harsh, forcing me to squint. And then I heard his voice. "You're awake." His voice was smooth and steady, with just the right hint of concern. I turned my head slightly to see him sitting beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, his fingers cool against my skin. His face, his familiar face, was etched with what appeared to be concern. At least that's what he wanted me to think. "You scared me," he said, his words thick with a fake softness that I could see right through. "You collapsed during dinner. The doctors think it was just a bad reaction to the wine. You didn't eat anything wrong, I swear." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The reaction was immediate. I remembered the wine, its smoothness, the burn it left as it slid down my throat. But there was also the warmth that spread through me, the dizziness that followed, the world tilting and spinning out of control. I saw his smirk as I collapsed, my breath catching for a moment, but I masked it, playing the role he expected me to. I wanted him to think I was weak, helpless, clueless. I wanted him to believe his plan had almost succeeded. I wanted to catch him. I squeezed his hand, my fingers barely moving, and let out a soft groan, as if I was still struggling to understand what had happened. "What happened to me?" I asked, feigning confusion. He nodded, his face tight like he had just exhaled a sigh of relief. "It was the wine. Just an unfortunate reaction," he said. "You'll be fine, I promise." I nodded slowly, pretending to believe him, though I knew better. I could feel the weight of his words, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of emotion that didn't match the calmness of his tone. It wasn't relief. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. He had expected this. He had planned it. I closed my eyes for a moment, pretending to drift back to sleep, but my mind was racing. The room spun behind my eyelids, memories flooding my consciousness. He had poisoned me. I didn't need a doctor to tell me that. The strange sweetness of the wine, the warmth spreading too quickly, the dizziness, it all pointed to one thing. He had tried to kill me. But why? Why would he do it? We hadn't been close in months. Our marriage had turned into nothing but a cold routine. I couldn't let the questions take over, not yet. I had to think clearly. I had to be careful. He still thought I was the same woman he could control, the woman he believed was weak. I had to let him think that. I had to let him believe he still had power over me, because that was the only way I could catch him. My body felt like a prison, but I stayed still, forcing myself to breathe slowly. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me panic. He was the one who should be scared now. The door to my room opened slowly and a doctor entered, his face hidden behind a mask. I blinked and watched as he glanced at my chart, making quick notes on a clipboard. His movements were methodical, clinical, as if he'd done this routine 1,000 times before. "Feeling all right?" the doctor asked, his voice neutral. I nodded weakly, forcing a raspy whisper. "Yes, just tired." "Good," he said, scribbling something down. "The symptoms you're experiencing seem consistent with an allergic reaction, or maybe an intolerance to something you ingested. But it's nothing serious, just rest and hydration." His words sounded hollow, like something he had rehearsed. But what really caught my attention wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it. The brief glance he shot at my husband as he mentioned the allergic reaction. There was something cautious in his eyes, just a fleeting moment of doubt in his expression. Was he just being careful? Or did he suspect something more? Did he know what I knew? Was he playing along with my husband's story? Or was he hiding something? I watched him closely, my mind processing every word. His professionalism was clear, but there was something else there. As the doctor turned to leave, I shifted slightly in the bed, my gaze lingering on the door. The subtle exchange between him and my husband raised more questions than answers. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed to focus on one thing: survival. As the door clicked shut behind the doctor, I heard my husband shift again in his chair. He was back to his fake sweet tone, asking if I needed anything, pretending everything was fine. His presence felt suffocating, his every word a lie. But this was my moment. I needed to hear him slip up. I had to stay quiet, let the silence settle between us. I didn't move, didn't speak. My mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in days. I could still feel the poison's faint traces in my body, but the fog was starting to clear. This was no accident. I lay there, pretending to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play, something much more than just a simple health scare. I had to figure out what it was, what my husband had been planning all along, and I would catch him. In that quiet, sterile room, I made a vow to myself. He wouldn't get away with it, not this time. The moment I was strong enough, the moment I could think clearly again, I would take back control. But for now, I had to wait. The game was just beginning. The morning after the hospital, everything felt heavier. It wasn't just the lingering effects of the poison in my veins, but the realization that I had been living with a man capable of plotting my death. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the world around me felt sharper, almost painfully so. But I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to be his next victim. I knew I had to act fast. Every moment spent lying in that hospital bed playing the helpless victim was another moment he thought he had control. But the truth was, I was already steps ahead of him. It was time to collect the pieces of the puzzle he had so carefully crafted. My first move was to get my hands on the medical records. I knew the hospital staff would try to dismiss my collapse as a simple allergic reaction, but I wasn't buying it. There had to be more to the story. As soon as the doctor left, I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. My legs were weak, but I forced myself to move. I asked the nurse for the full medical report, pretending to want to understand what had happened to me. She didn't hesitate. After all, I was just another patient who had collapsed from an unfortunate reaction. She handed me the report with a smile, but as I read through it, my heart began to race. The doctor had dismissed poisoning as a possibility, but the report told a different story. The substances found in my bloodstream didn't match anything related to food. There was something foreign there, something that shouldn't have been. The report said it was unexpected, but I knew what that meant. I had been poisoned. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. I had the proof now. Though it was buried in medical jargon, I had the evidence I needed. The next step was crucial. I had to keep this safe, safe from my husband, safe from anyone who might want to erase it. I carefully took out my phone, ensuring no one was around. My fingers trembled, but I couldn't afford to show weakness. I snapped a picture of the part of the report that proved the presence of the unknown substance in my bloodstream. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, replaced the report, and made sure there were no signs I had touched it. My husband could come by at any moment. If he saw me acting suspicious, he might realize I was onto him. I had to be smart. But with that photo in my phone, I had the first piece of irrefutable evidence that he had been trying to kill me. I wasn't going to let this slip away. Not this time. The next thing I needed to uncover was why. Why had he done this? What did he stand to gain by killing me? That evening, after I was discharged from the hospital, I returned home, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also a bizarre sense of clarity. I knew he had been planning this for months, possibly even longer. I needed to know exactly what he stood to gain from my death. The moment he left for work, I went straight to the computer. We shared a bank account, so it wasn't difficult for me to access the details of his recent transactions. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed in the login information, unsure of what I would find, but knowing I had a bad feeling about it. As I scanned through the account history, my heart skipped a beat. A large, recent transaction to an insurance company stood out like a neon sign. What could he be paying for now? I picked up the phone and without hesitation dialed the number for the insurance company. I pretended to be his assistant handling some paperwork. I asked for details about a policy he had recently taken out in my name. The representative was polite, but when I heard the details of the policy, my stomach turned. $1 million life insurance policy. It was under my name, and the payout would go to him if I died under accidental circumstances. I asked a few more questions, trying to keep my voice steady as I forced myself to listen to the confirmation that this policy was active and that it would pay out to him the moment I was gone. It was clear now. He wasn't just trying to kill me for no reason. He was planning it. The money, the life insurance policy, it was all part of the plan. He wanted me gone so that he could collect the payout. Now I had everything I needed to understand his motives. The dinner, the wine, the poison. It was all part of the plan to end my life. But this insurance policy made it clear that his feelings toward me were purely transactional. He had been planning this for months, watching me, waiting for the right moment. I realized now that the affection he had shown me in the beginning of our marriage was nothing more than a facade. He had never really loved me. It was always about control, always about his own financial gain. The realization hit me like a truck. My entire life had been nothing more than a stepping stone for him to achieve his desires. The house, the car, the lifestyle I had worked for, all of it. But in the end, he thought he could simply take it from me, take my life. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not this time. I knew the evidence I had so far wasn't enough to bring him down. I needed more. I needed something that would tie him directly to the plot, something irrefutable. And then, one night, I had an idea. When he left the house for his usual late-night business meetings, I set up my phone in the bedroom, just out of sight. I knew he would be talking about me. He always did. He didn't realize how careless he was when he thought no one was listening. I turned on the recording app, placed the phone on the nightstand, and waited. That night, I heard everything through the thin walls. I could hear his voice, low and almost conspiratorial. "She should have been dead by now," he said. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "The hospital messed things up, but I'll take care of it. She's not going to survive this." I felt a chill run down my spine, the final confirmation I needed. He had been planning to finish the job. And then the real kicker came. "The policy is still good. I'll make sure she doesn't survive. The payout is mine no matter what." There was the smoking gun. Proof. My husband had been plotting my murder all along. Every word he spoke confirmed it. This wasn't a mistake or a fluke. He had been carefully orchestrating my death for months, all to collect the money. The moment he walked through the door later that night, I already knew he was going down. The moment I had all the evidence I needed, the weight of the situation started to settle in. I wasn't just planning to expose my husband for his crimes. I was planning to dismantle his entire life. The toxicology report, the insurance details, and the damning audio recording all pointed in one clear direction. My husband had been plotting my death for months. Now, I had to play my cards carefully. Every step had to be deliberate. I couldn't afford to slip up. The truth was, I was in more danger now than ever before. He didn't know I was onto him, but I was still in his house, still within his reach. He still thought I was the same weak, clueless wife he had always controlled. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I took a deep breath as I sat down at my desk, my hands trembling only slightly. I couldn't let him see that I was nervous. I composed myself, pulled out my phone, and began to craft the message. It was time to contact the authorities. Anonymously, of course. I carefully crafted the message, my finger hovering over the keys as I considered every word. I had the evidence. There was no reason to wait anymore. I couldn't afford to let him grow more confident. He was starting to get careless, but he still hadn't made the final move. I had to stop him before he did. I attached the toxicology report, the insurance details, and the audio recording of his conversation. Every piece of evidence I had worked so hard to gather was there in a single undeniable message. This wasn't just a case of a husband who had fallen out of love with his wife. Number this was a man who had been scheming her death for the sake of money. I sent the message to the police using an encrypted email service that would leave no trace. The investigation had to be thorough. He had to be caught in the act. After I pressed send, I stared at the phone for a few moments, willing myself not to feel the rush of fear that threatened to overtake me. I had done the right thing, but now the waiting began. I had no idea how quickly they would respond, how soon they'd start digging into his life. But I had to trust them. I had to trust that the truth would finally come to light. For now, I would keep playing the part. It was almost too easy to pretend to be the fragile, confused woman I had been just days ago in front of my husband. I wore the mask of weakness so well it almost felt like I had become her again. I let him take care of me, let him believe that I was still recovering from that supposed bad reaction to the wine. Every now and then, I would mutter something about feeling lightheaded or mention how strange the night had been. But inside, I was planning. I was gathering the pieces, waiting for the right moment to strike. He, on the other hand, was growing more impatient. His eyes, always a little too wide now, betrayed his anxiety. Every time he looked at me, I saw the subtle shift. His focus on my health was less about concern and more about the clock ticking down. He was waiting for me to die. He thought I was just moments away from slipping through his fingers, ready to claim the life insurance money. But I could see it in him. He was so wrapped up in the thought of that payout that he didn't notice how much I had changed. He didn't realize that his carefully planned facade had started to crack. He didn't realize that I was already 2 steps ahead. As I kept up the charade, I watched him, listening for any hint that he was getting more desperate. And I could tell he was. The police were working quietly, but I could feel their presence every day. I waited, and I could feel the tension in the air growing, the whispers of an investigation growing louder. I knew the police had started digging into his life. They were checking his financial records, looking for any signs of unusual activity. I had given them everything they needed to start investigating. They didn't have to go far to find out what kind of man he was. As I moved around the house, I kept feeding the police small, subtle pieces of information that could help build the case against him. I never outright confronted him, but when he wasn't looking, I'd leave out little details that could push the investigation in the right direction. I didn't want to make it too obvious. I didn't want him to catch on. So I remained calm, carefully watching every move he made, making sure to let nothing slip. The police called me a few times, asking about different things, like his behavior around me, his financial habits, his relationship with his family. The more I answered, the more I realized just how much they were starting to piece together. The dots were connecting. They were getting closer to the truth. And my husband? He didn't have a clue. But as the investigation intensified, my husband began to show signs of impatience. I could see it in his eyes, the desperation growing with every passing day. He knew his plan wasn't going as smoothly as he had hoped. I could hear it in his voice, his attempts to cover his tracks. He started to push harder, trying to force things along. One night, I overheard him talking on the phone in the other room. His voice was frantic. "I don't care how you do it," he snapped, "but I need this done soon. She's supposed to be dead already. The insurance payout." His mind was set on it. Do you understand? My heart clenched in my chest. I had suspected that he might resort to more drastic measures, but hearing it confirmed so openly, knowing how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, it made me shiver. But I didn't show it. I stayed calm. I let him believe that his pressure was working, that I was just a sick woman, barely hanging on. I was still pretending to be weak, still pretending to be the wife he thought he had under control. But I wasn't weak. I was getting stronger with every passing day, and I knew I had one last move to make. He still didn't know that I had already sent the evidence to the police. He thought I was too frail to even think clearly. He still believed that I was just a victim, ready to die any day now. His arrogance, his confidence, gave me an advantage. He had underestimated me, and that would be his downfall. Every day he grew more complacent. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. After all, I had no memory of what happened. I was his perfect victim. Or so he thought. But he was wrong. I watched him move through the house, his usual air of superiority replaced by a thin veneer of desperation. He was getting bolder, more reckless in his actions, but he still didn't realize that I was onto him. The police were closing in. His actions were only pushing him closer to the edge. And when he finally made his next move, thinking he had won, I would be there to expose him for who he really was. The final act was near. The game was almost over, and this time I was the one in control. The moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. I sat in the living room, pretending to flip through a magazine. My hands were steady, even though my heart was racing. The weight of the evidence was crushing. Everything I had collected, everything I had suffered through had led to this moment. My husband still didn't know what was about to unfold. He thought he had won, that he had outsmarted everyone, but he hadn't. The police were closing in and his time was running out. The door opened and I heard his footsteps as he walked in. His voice was light, casual. "Hey, you're still awake?" he asked, a false cheer in his tone. He didn't notice the change in the air, the way everything seemed heavier, more tense. I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the pages in front of me, pretending to read. His footsteps came closer, and I could feel the tension between us, thick like fog. That was when it happened. The door crashed open and the sound of boots hitting the floor echoed through the house. Police! Get on the ground! My husband froze. His face turned pale as he looked toward the door. The officers stormed in, their badges glinting under the harsh overhead lights. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. My husband's eyes darted between me and the officers. It was as if the realization had hit him all at once, crashing into his consciousness like a tidal wave. He was no longer the one in control. The facade he had built was crumbling in front of him. "You?" he stammered, his voice shaky. "You remember?" I didn't answer him right away. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my eyes never leaving his. His desperate attempt to salvage his plan to deny the truth only made me more certain of what needed to be done. I took a deep breath, and in the silence that followed I leaned in closer, my voice low but steady. I never forgot. His eyes widened, panic flashing across his face, but it was too late. The officers moved in, cuffing him with practiced efficiency. I didn't flinch. The weight of his actions had been building for so long, and now it was finally crashing down on him. As they read him his rights, I stood still, watching the man I had once loved lose everything in the blink of an eye. His desperation was palpable as he was led out of the house, but there was nothing he could do now. The game was over. The truth had been exposed. I watched, my heart strangely calm, as the officers took my husband away. His face was full of fear and regret, fear of losing everything he had worked for, and regret that he hadn't seen this coming sooner. His voice wavered as he turned to me, his eyes full of disbelief. "Please, you don't understand. I didn't mean to. Please, just help me." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just cold, steady resolve. He had begged for mercy before, but I had given him none. He had no mercy for me. After all, he had planned to kill me for money, and now the tables had turned. He reached out as the officers dragged him to the door. His voice cracked. "Please, you have to understand. I was just trying to—" But I didn't let him finish. I stepped back, and with a final glance at the man who had once been my husband, I turned away. I was done. There was no turning back now. As he was escorted out of the house, his desperate pleas fading into the distance, I felt the weight of everything I had been carrying lift off my shoulders. The man who had once controlled my life, my emotions, my choices was gone, and, in his place, I was free. The car pulled away, the officer sirens wailing in the distance, but I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I still couldn't shake the image of his face, the way he had looked at me in those final moments. It wasn't just fear. There was something else in his eyes. Regret. It was the same regret I had seen in him on that fateful night at the dinner table when he thought he could poison me and walk away unscathed. He hadn't been able to see the truth. Not until the very end. Yet, he thought he could get away with it. But in the end, his own actions had sealed his fate. I thought about what he had said to me as they led him out. "Please, you have to understand." He didn't get to make excuses anymore. The truth was finally out. His false apologies were empty. He had never seen me as a person, just a pawn in his game. But I had woken up, and now he had to face the consequences. I stood there in the middle of the living room, watching the empty space where my husband once stood. The weight of the moment didn't hit me all at once. It was like a slow, quiet realization that began to spread through me, filling me from the inside out. He was gone, and with him, the chains that had held me for so long. I had survived. He was arrested for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and poisoning. The charges against him were ironclad, the evidence undeniable. His carefully constructed life had fallen apart. And as the police transported him to the station, the case was already beginning to unravel. The life he had worked so hard to build, his wealth, his status, everything he thought he could secure through manipulation, was slipping through his fingers. and he would never get it back. The world seemed quieter now, lighter. It wasn't over yet, but the weight that had hung over me for so long had been lifted. Justice was being served, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. With his arrest, my life was mine again. The future that he had tried to steal from me was still ahead of me. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to live in fear anymore. The life insurance policy that had been the catalyst for all this, the one he had intended to steal from me, was now mine. I knew how to use it, how to rebuild. I wasn't going to let the shadows of my past control me. I would take back everything he had tried to take, and I would create a new life for myself. As I walked away from the house later that day, I didn't look back. The house that once felt like a prison, a place where every room echoed with the lies he had told me, was now just a memory, a chapter closed once and for all. I was a survivor, and this was only the beginning. The future stretched out before me, a blank page waiting to be filled. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I would write my own story. The final betrayal had been his, but the victory, that was mine.